The leather of the chair was cold against my back, a stark contrast to the humid July air I'd walked through to get here. Mr. Davies's office on the 54th floor was a sterile box of mahogany and glass, overlooking a muted, hazy version of the New York City I had called home for 50 years. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, the only sound was the rustle of thick, cream-colored paper in the lawyer's hands. A sound like dry leaves skittering across a grave. My son, Mark, sat beside me, but he might as well have been 1,000 miles away. His gaze was fixed on the polished surface of the table, his reflection a pale, distorted mask of a man I barely recognized. Across from us sat his wife, Jessica. She was perfectly still, a predator waiting for the kill. Her nails, the color of blood, were the only vibrant thing in the room. My husband, Richard, had been gone for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of hollow condolences, casseroles from neighbors who didn't know my name, and the crushing, disorienting silence of our penthouse apartment. Richard had always been the one to fill the space, with his booming laugh, his confident stride, his endless talk of markets and mergers. I had been the quiet counterpoint, the soft background music to his grand symphony. Now, the music had stopped. "And so we come to the primary assets," Mr. Davies said, his voice a dry monotone that offered no comfort. He cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "To my only son, Mark Richard Vance, I bequeath the entirety of my stock portfolio, all savings and checking accounts, and the remainder of my liquid assets." Jessica's lips curved into a faint, triumphant smile. She didn't look at Mark. She looked at me. A flicker of a glance, sharp and possessive. Mark shifted in his chair, a small, uncomfortable movement. Further, Mr. Davies continued, turning a page. "To my son, Mark, I also bequeath our primary residence, penthouse 4B at 217 Park Avenue, New York, New York, with all its contents and furnishings." The air left my lungs in a silent rush. Our primary residence. The home I had decorated, the kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals, the window I had looked out of every morning for 3 decades. It was now his. Theirs. I felt a cold dread begin to creep up my spine. I'd expected to be taken care of course. A widow's portion, a comfortable arrangement. Richard was nothing if not pragmatic. I chanced to look at Mark. He finally met my eyes, but only for a second. In that fleeting moment, I saw not joy, but a deep, gut-wrenching shame. Then he looked away, back to the safety of the polished table. "And finally," Mr. Davies said, his gaze dropping to the last paragraph as if he were reluctant to read it. "To my beloved wife, Elara Vance, for her 52 years of companionship." He paused, and the word companionship hung in the air, clinical and cold. "I bequeath the property listed under my name in Pottawatomie County, Oklahoma. Specifically, the single-story residential property and the land it occupies at 14 Willow Lane, Harmony Creek, Oklahoma." Silence. Not the respectful silence of a memorial, but a stunned, sharp-edged vacuum. Oklahoma? I had never been to Oklahoma. Richard had never mentioned owning property there. Harmony Creek. The name sounded like a cruel joke. I must have misheard. A summer home we'd forgotten? A plot of land he'd bought as an investment? "I'm sorry," I said, my voice a small, reedy thing. "Could you repeat that?" Mr. Davies looked at me over the rim of his glasses, his expression tinged with something like pity. "Your husband, Mr. Vance, left you the house at 14 Willow Lane in Harmony Creek, Oklahoma." The room began to feel very small, the chilled air thick and unbreathable. A rundown apartment in some remote, dusty corner of the country. That was it. That was my 52 years. A punchline to a story I didn't even know was being told. Jessica broke the silence. It wasn't a laugh, but a small, sharp exhalation of air, a sound of pure, unadulterated victory. "Well," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "I suppose that's that." She stood up, smoothing the front of her tailored dress. "Richard always knew what everyone was worth. It's almost poetic, isn't it?" Her eyes, cold and clear, drilled into me. The polite mask she wore in public was gone, replaced by undisguised contempt. "Mark, let's go. We have arrangements to make." Mark rose slowly, like an old man. He wouldn't look at me. "Mom," he started, his voice weak. "Don't, Mark," Jessica snapped, her voice low and dangerous. She turned her full attention back to me. The pity in the lawyer's eyes was gone, replaced by the chilling glare of my daughter-in-law. "Let's be clear, Alara. The penthouse needs to be vacated. We'll be moving in properly next week. We'll need you to have your things out by then." "Jessica," Mark pleaded weakly. "No," she said, cutting him off. "This is our home now." Richard made that very clear. She picked up her ridiculously expensive handbag from the table. Weak people get weak places. He knew that. "You have your little house in Oklahoma. I'm sure you'll be very comfortable there." She looked me up and down, a final, dismissive appraisal. Then she turned and walked out, her heels clicking a sharp, final rhythm on the marble floor. Mark lingered for a moment, his face a miserable portrait of conflict. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The words wouldn't come. Or perhaps there were simply no words left. He gave a helpless little shrug, a gesture of a boy, not a man, and then he followed his wife. I was left alone in the cold, silent office with Mr. Davies. The will lay on the table between us, a testament to a life I had apparently misunderstood completely. He began to stack the papers with quiet, professional efficiency. "Mrs. Vance," he said softly, "I have the deed and the keys here for you." He pushed a large manila envelope across the polished surface. It slid to a stop in front of me. Inside, I knew, was my new life. A rundown apartment in a place I'd never heard of. An exile. My hands trembled as I reached for it. Heartbroken wasn't the right word. A heart has to be whole to be broken. Mine felt like it had been hollowed out, leaving nothing but a fragile, brittle shell. But beneath the shock, beneath the grief and the humiliation, a tiny, unfamiliar ember began to glow. Curiosity. Why, Richard? After all these years, why this final, cruel mystery? I took the envelope. I would drive to my new home. I would see this final act of his, this testament to what he thought I was worth. I would walk in, and I would face the emptiness he had left me. I just had no idea that the emptiness was a lie. The ride up in the private elevator was silent, a smooth, bloodless ascent. When the doors opened directly into the foyer of the penthouse, the silence followed me in. It was different now. It was no longer the heavy, grief-stricken silence of a home missing its patriarch. It was the sterile, humming silence of a showroom. It no longer belonged to me. I walked through the vast living area, my sensible shoes making no sound on the plush, cream-colored carpet. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, the only sign of life. The view of Central Park was as breathtaking as ever, a sprawling tapestry of green and gray. Richard had called it the best wallpaper in the world. It had always felt like a painting to me, something beautiful to be admired from a distance, never touched. Much like my husband himself. For the next 3 days, I packed. It was a strange, disembodying process, like curating a museum exhibit of a life that was only partially mine. I started in the bedroom, with the walk-in closet that was the size of my first apartment. His side was a forest of dark, tailored suits, crisp white shirts, and silk ties arranged by color. Each suit smelled faintly of his cologne, sandalwood, and success. I left it all untouched. It belonged to the penthouse now, a ghost in the machine. My side of the closet was a modest collection of comfortable slacks, soft cardigans, and simple dresses in muted tones of beige, navy, and gray. I was a woman who had learned not to take up too much space. As I folded a gray cashmere sweater into a cardboard box, I realized that 52 years of my life could fit into 3 boxes and a suitcase. Every object was a memory, but the memories were thin, translucent. Here was the silver picture frame on the mantelpiece. In it, a photo from our wedding day. I was 20, my face bright with a naive, boundless love. Richard, handsome in his tuxedo, was smiling too, but his eyes were looking slightly past the camera, as if at a future that I was merely adjacent to. I packed the books from my nightstand, collections of poetry, dog-eared novels. His side of the bed held only one book, a leather-bound history of the Federal Reserve. He was a man of grand gestures for the outside world and quiet, pragmatic neglect for the one inside. He'd never once asked about the stories I read, the worlds I escaped to when the silence in the apartment grew too loud. I worked methodically, wrapping the few porcelain figurines I'd collected over the years in newspaper. One was a small, delicate bluebird he had given me for our 10th anniversary. He'd handed it to me in its box over breakfast, his eyes already on the financial pages of the Wall Street Journal. "Here," he'd said. "It reminded me of you." I had cherished it then, a rare token of affection. Now, holding its hollow, fragile body in my hand, I wondered what he had meant. Was I just a pretty, silent thing to be placed on a shelf? My internal monologue was a relentless hum of questions. Was I ever truly his partner, or just the curator of his home? The hostess of his dinner parties? The stable, predictable background against which his brilliant life could unfold? Jessica's words echoed in my head, "Weak people get weak places." Had Richard thought I was weak? Or had he simply forgotten I was there at all? His business trips had become more frequent in the last decade. He'd always come back with an expensive gift, a bracelet, a scarf, and a vague story about a difficult client or a successful merger. I never questioned him. It was not my place. I had trusted him implicitly. That trust now felt like the most profound kind of foolishness. This house in Oklahoma, had he been going there all this time? The thought was a small, sharp stone in my shoe, a persistent discomfort that I couldn't ignore. On the 4th day, Mark called. "Mom? Are you doing okay?" His voice was strained, thin. "I'm packing, Mark," I said, my own voice flat. I was folding a tablecloth into a box. "Right. Listen, Jessica is a little intense. She doesn't mean it the way it sounds." "Oh, I think she means it exactly the way it sounds," I replied, my words sharper than I intended. A painful silence stretched between us. I could hear him breathing, the short, shallow breaths of a man trapped. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. I didn't know. I never thought he would." "Neither did I said, and the conversation withered and died. He promised to help me move the boxes down, but I knew he wouldn't. Jessica wouldn't allow it. By the end of the week, I was done. The penthouse looked exactly the same, yet it was completely empty of me. My 3 boxes and suitcase stood by the door like humble pilgrims at the gate of a palace. I took one last walk through the rooms, my hand trailing along the cold marble of the kitchen island, the smooth silk of the curtains. I had not cried. The hurt was too deep for tears. It was a cold, hard knot in my chest, a feeling of being utterly and completely erased. This wasn't my home. Maybe it never had been. It was a stage, and my part in the play was over. I pulled the heavy door shut behind me. The lock clicked with a heavy finality, a sound that severed a 52-year-old cord. As the elevator began its silent descent, I didn't look back. There was nothing to look back at. There was only the road ahead, leading to a dusty, forgotten town and a final, baffling piece of a man I thought I knew. I had to see it. I had to understand this last, cruel chapter he had written for me. The garage beneath the penthouse was a hushed cavern of concrete and steel, populated by glossy, silent beasts, Porsches, Bentleys, Teslas. Tucked away in a forgotten corner, covered in a fine layer of gray city dust, was my car. A 1998 Buick LeSabre. Richard had bought it for me 15 years ago, a sensible car for grocery runs and the occasional trip to the library. He called it the barge. He and Mark would joke about its boat-like handling and its beige, unapologetically bland color. It was the one thing in my life that felt entirely, unglamorously mine. The engine turned over with a soft groan, as if reluctant to wake from a long sleep. As I steered its considerable length toward the exit ramp, the parking attendant gave me a puzzled look, a silent question as to what this relic was doing in his pristine garage. I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I didn't care what anyone thought. Leaving New York was like reversing a film of my life. The familiar avenues, the canyons of glass and steel, the relentless river of yellow cabs, it all receded in the rearview mirror until it was just a jagged silhouette against a pale morning sky. I crossed the George Washington Bridge, the Hudson River a muddy ribbon below, and pointed the nose of the Buick west. The first day was a blur of concrete and green signage. Pennsylvania. Ohio. The landscape was a monotonous ribbon of highway, bordered by trees and the occasional strip mall. I drove with a grim, mechanical focus, my hands gripping the worn leather of the steering wheel. The silence in the car was absolute, a stark contrast to the noise in my head. Jessica's voice, Richard's name, the rustle of the wheel, a toxic chorus on a loop. To drown it out, I fumbled in the glove compartment. I expected to find old maps, perhaps a forgotten pair of sunglasses. Instead, my fingers closed around a worn, plastic case. A cassette tape. And another. And another. There were a dozen of them, tucked into a dusty pouch. They weren't the classical music Richard played at his dinner parties or the jazz he favored on Sunday mornings. The labels were handwritten in his familiar, sharp script. Names I didn't recognize: Dust Bowl Blues, Appalachian Spring, Iron and Steel, Prairie Lament. Curious, I pushed the first one, Prairie Lament, into the car's old cassette deck. The player word clicked, and then a sound I had never associated with my husband filled the car. It was the spare, haunting melody of a lone acoustic guitar, each note clean and sharp, telling a story without words. It was music that spoke of wide-open spaces, of solitude, of a deep, aching melancholy. It was beautiful, and it was a complete mystery. I drove for 3 days. Each night, I'd pull into a soulless roadside motel, the kind with flickering neon signs and the faint smell of bleach. I'd eat a cellophane-wrapped sandwich from a gas station and fall into a dreamless sleep on a stiff, unfamiliar bed. In the morning, I would get back in the car, push in another of Richard's secret tapes, and drive. With every mile, the world outside the windows changed. The dense green of the east softened and spread out. The sky, once a narrow strip between buildings, opened up into a vast, intimidating dome of blue. I drove through Indiana and Illinois, an ocean of corn and soy rippling in the wind. Then Missouri, with its rolling hills, and finally, I saw the sign, a simple, brown rectangle with white letters. Welcome to Oklahoma. The change was immediate. The air grew hotter, heavier. The green faded to a dusty ochre. The soil at the roadside was a startling, deep red, the color of a fresh wound. The music from the speakers, a gritty, slide guitar piece from the tape labeled Dust Bowl Blues, suddenly made perfect sense. This was a land that had endured. It was stripped down to its essentials, earth and sky. There was a brutal, beautiful emptiness to it that was both terrifying and strangely calming. My quiet, manicured life in New York felt like a distant dream, a fiction I had read in a book. The curated perfection of the penthouse, the polite social circles, the illusion of a stable, successful marriage, it all felt like a lie out here. This felt real. The shimmering heat rising from the asphalt, the endless horizon, the lonely hum of my tires on the road. I was following a map Mr. Davies had printed for me, a series of red lines leading to a tiny dot named Harmony Creek. As I turned off the interstate onto a smaller state highway, the world grew quieter, emptier. I passed weathered farmhouses, rusted-out trucks sinking into fields, and cattle standing motionless under the punishing sun. My grief, which had been a sharp, stabbing pain, had dulled into a persistent, heavy ache. But alongside it, that ember of curiosity had grown. The tapes, the secret property, the deliberate, surgical way he had cut me out of his New York life and exiled me here. It wasn't just cruelty. It was a message. I was a quiet woman, a woman who had spent her life observing rather than acting. I had read thousands of stories, but I had never had one of my own. Richard, in his final, baffling act, had just given me one. I didn't know what I was driving toward. A dilapidated shack? A final, pathetic insult? Or an answer to the question that now consumed me, played out in the notes of his secret music. Who are you, Richard? Who are you, really? The sign for Harmony Creek was so faded by the sun it was almost invisible. The paint had peeled away, leaving a ghost of the letters against weathered wood. I nearly missed the turnoff. A narrow asphalt road cracked and veined with weeds. The Buick's tires crunched over loose gravel as I slowed the car, entering what could barely be called a town. Harmony Creek looked like a photograph from a history book, left out in the sun to bleach. It was a single main street, flanked by brick buildings with tired, sagging facades. Some windows were boarded up, plywood sheets pale against the dark red brick. Others displayed dusty, forgotten goods, a hardware store with a pyramid of paint cans in the window, a diner with a buzzing neon sign that read "Eat," the S having given up long ago. There were few people. An old man in overalls sat on a bench outside what looked like a general store, watching my beige Buick crawl past as if it were a spaceship. A dog lay sleeping in a patch of shade, not even twitching as I drove by. The air was thick with a dusty silence, broken only by the hum of my engine and the distant, shrill buzz of cicadas. It was the kind of place where time didn't just slow down, it seemed to have come to a complete stop 30 years ago. A wave of despair, cold and sharp, washed over me. This was it. This was my inheritance. A place forgotten by the world, a living relic of decline. The name, Harmony Creek, was a bitter irony. There was no harmony here, just a profound and unsettling stillness. And I didn't see a creek. I found Willow Lane at the very end of the main street. It was less a lane and more a dirt track that branched off toward a small cluster of houses. They were modest, single-story homes, some with neat little gardens, others with yards surrendering to the relentless will of the prairie grass. And then, at the very end of the track, I saw it. Number 14. My heart sank. It was worse than I had imagined. The house was small and low to the ground, its white paint peeling in long, curling strips, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. The roof of the porch sagged on one side, held up by sheer memory. The windows were dark, lifeless squares, one of them covered with a sheet of plywood. The yard was a tangle of weeds and sun-scorched grass, dominated by a single, gnarled oak tree that looked as tired as the house it shaded. It was the physical embodiment of neglect. This was the weak place for the weak person. Jessica's words returned with a fresh sting. Richard had banished me to a ruin. I parked the Buick on the dusty patch of ground that served as a driveway and killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was absolute. For a long moment, I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel, the keys to this place a dead weight in my pocket. Part of me wanted to turn the car around, drive away, and never look back. Go where? I had nowhere else to go. This was the end of the line. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I got out of the car. The heat was a physical presence, wrapping around me like a wool blanket. The air smelled of dust, dry grass, and something else, a faint, sweet scent of sun-baked wood. I walked up the 3 rickety steps to the porch, each one groaning in protest under my weight. The front door was a faded, dusty blue, a single spot of muted color in a landscape of beige and gray. The doorknob was tarnished brass, but as I reached for the keyhole, I paused. My fingers brushed against the lock. It was a heavy, old-fashioned brass lock set. But it was clean. Amidst the layers of dust and grime that coated the door, the lock itself was curiously free of dirt. The keyhole gleamed faintly in the afternoon light. There were no cobwebs, no accumulated grit in the crevices. It looked maintained, as if a key had been turned in it not too long ago. It was a small, discordant detail, a single clear note in a cacophony of decay. It made no sense. Why would anyone maintain the lock on a derelict house? A shiver of unease, mingled with that persistent spark of curiosity, ran down my spine. I looked around. The street was empty. The neighboring houses were quiet. The old man from the bench was gone. I was completely alone. My hand trembled slightly as I slid the key into the lock. It was an old, heavy, skeleton-style key, the kind I hadn't seen in decades. It fit perfectly. With a surprisingly smooth, well-oiled click, the tumblers turned. The sound was loud in the oppressive silence. I pushed the door. It swung inward without a creak, opening a rectangle of darkness into the dusty light. The air that drifted out was cool and musty, the smell of a place that had been sealed for a long time. Stepping over the threshold was like stepping into the past, or into my grave. I took a breath, steeling myself for what I would find inside. I expected dust, decay, and the crushing finality of Richard's disdain. I was prepared for the worst. I was not prepared for the truth. My eyes took a moment to adjust to the gloom. The interior of the house was exactly as I had pictured it, a tableau of abandonment. A thin film of dust coated everything, shimmering in the shafts of light that pierced through the grimy windows. The main room was small, a combined living and dining area. The furniture, a sagging sofa, a sturdy-looking wooden table with 2 chairs, a bookshelf, was draped in white cloths, their shapes like sleeping, forgotten ghosts. The air was heavy with the scent of old paper, dry wood, and the deep, cellar-like smell of time itself. It was profoundly depressing. This was the final punctuation on my life story, a dusty, insignificant period. I walked further in, my footsteps silent on a threadbare but surprisingly intact rug. I ran a finger along the shrouded bookshelf. The dust was thick, undisturbed. In the small, adjacent kitchen, the countertops were clear, the sink empty. Everything was neat, tidy, and utterly lifeless. I felt a hollow ache in my chest. So this was it. He had owned the sad, empty little house and, in the end, decided it was all I deserved. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. I had given him my youth, my loyalty, my entire life, and he had given me a tomb. I wandered back into the main room, my gaze falling on a closed door at the far end of the wall, next to the bookshelf. I assumed it was a bedroom or perhaps a closet. It was a plain, windowless door, painted the same faded white as the walls. There was nothing remarkable about it. But as I moved closer, I felt a faint, almost imperceptible draft seeping from under it. Cool air. My curiosity, that persistent ember, flared again. On an impulse, I reached out and turned the simple brass knob. It turned easily in my hand. I pulled the door open. And I stopped breathing. The scent hit me first. Not dust and decay, but the clean, sharp fragrance of lemon oil, the metallic tang of solder, and the rich, warm smell of freshly worked wood. My eyes, accustomed to the dim light, were momentarily dazzled. The room beyond the door was bathed in a soft, golden glow from several low-hanging workshop lamps. It was not a closet. It was not a bedroom. It was a world. The room was larger than the entire front part of the house, a space that shouldn't have been possible. The walls were not plaster but warm, honey-colored pine, lined from floor to ceiling with meticulously organized shelves. And on those shelves, arranged with the precision of a museum curator, was a breathtaking collection of mechanical wonders. There were automatons, a foot-high figure of a rider in 18th-century dress, his quill poised over a tiny piece of parchment, a silver owl whose head turned as I moved, its jeweled eyes seeming to follow me. A miniature circus with clowns that tumbled and horses that pranced on a tiny stage. There were music boxes of every shape and size, crafted from burled walnut, gleaming cherry, and polished brass, their intricate inner workings visible through crystal lids. It was a trove of impossible, beautiful things, each one a universe of gears, springs, and levers. In the center of the room stood a heavy wooden workbench, its surface scarred with the honorable wounds of creation. Tools I didn't recognize were arranged on a leather mat with surgical precision, tiny files, gleaming pliers, brass calipers. And there, in the center of the bench, clamped gently in a vise, was an unfinished piece. A ballerina carved from wood with exquisite detail, her arms arched gracefully above her head. Her mechanical heart lay exposed, a delicate, glittering labyrinth of brass gears and silver wires waiting to be brought to life. This wasn't a hobby. This was a passion. A secret, hidden life. My mind struggled to connect the man who discussed stock futures over breakfast with the man who could create this magic. The Richard I knew was pragmatic, logical, almost clinically detached. He appreciated art, but as an investment. The man who built this room, this sanctuary, was a creator, a dreamer, an artist of the highest order. My legs felt weak. I leaned against the door frame for support, my gaze sweeping the room again. This was where he went on his business trips. This was his real work. The finance world, the New York penthouse, the booming success, that was the disguise. This hidden workshop in a dusty Oklahoma town, this was his soul. And he had left it to me. My eyes fell back to the workbench. Next to the unfinished ballerina, placed squarely in the center of a clean, oil-free patch of wood, was a single, thick envelope of the same cream-colored paper as the will. On the front, in his sharp, familiar handwriting, was one word: Alara. My fingers trembled as I reached for the envelope. It felt heavy, substantial. The paper was crisp, not a speck of the workshop's dust on it. It had been placed there for me to find, a final, silent word waiting in this impossible room. I sank onto the tall wooden stool beside the workbench, the seat still holding the faint impression of the man who had sat there for countless hours. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I slid my finger under the flap, breaking the seal. Inside was a single sheet of the same heavy paper, folded in thirds. His handwriting, usually a quick, decisive scrawl on checks and legal documents, was different here. It was slower, more deliberate, each letter formed with a calligrapher's care. My dearest Alara. The salutation was a shock in itself. In 52 years of marriage, he had never once written me a letter. Dearest was a word he never used. It felt like an address from a stranger. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have made the journey. I am sorry for the way you had to find out. I am sorry for so many things. But some secrets are too fragile for the light of day, and this was mine. I know what you must be thinking. You must feel betrayed, confused, abandoned. I don't blame you. The will was a blunt instrument, I know. It was designed to be. It was a lock, and only you were ever meant to have the key. I looked up from the page, my eyes scanning the shelves of mechanical marvels. A lock. This entire town, this run-down house, was just a lock to protect this room. For my entire adult life, I lived two lives. The first was the one you know, Richard Vance, the man of finance, the master of a universe of numbers and projections. It was a good life, a successful one. It gave us security, comfort, the penthouse with its view of the park. But it was a role I was playing. The applause was nice, but the stage was always cold. My other life was here, in this room. I am not a financier, Alara. Not really. In my heart, I am a builder. A maker of things that tick and whir and play music. My father was a watchmaker, did I ever tell you that? A quiet man in a small town in Pennsylvania. He could make magic with gears and springs. He saw the world as a series of beautiful, interlocking movements. I inherited his hands, but not his courage. I was afraid of his poverty, of his obscurity. So I ran to New York and built a fortress of money around myself. But I never forgot the music of the gears. I bought this house 30 years ago under a different name. It became my sanctuary, my escape. The business trips were lies, all of them. I was coming here. To work, to create, to breathe. This was the only place I ever felt truly myself. A wave of dizziness washed over me. 30 years. 3 decades of lies. 30 years of a shared life that was, for him, only half a life. The pain was sharp, a fresh wound. But as I kept reading, the pain was tempered by a growing sense of wonder. I know you have questions. Why keep it from you? The truth is, I was a coward. In the beginning, I was ashamed of this hobby. It felt frivolous compared to the high-stakes world I inhabited. It felt small. And then, as the years went on, the secret grew too big to confess. To admit to this would have been to admit that our life in New York was a performance. I didn't know how. And I was afraid of what you would think. You were always so quiet, so observant. You see the world in ways others don't. You notice the small things, the way the light hits a dust mote, the melody in a bird's song. I always felt you lived in a softer, more beautiful world than I did. I was afraid my loud, aggressive New York life would shatter it. And I was afraid that this quiet, secret world of mine wasn't enough for you. It was a foolish, prideful fear. My greatest mistake. My vision blurred. A single tear traced a path down my cheek, dripping onto the paper and smudging the ink. He had seen me. All those years I had felt invisible, like a piece of furniture in his life. He had been watching. He had understood something about me that I barely understood myself. Which brings me to Mark and Jessica. And to the will. Jessica sees the world only in terms of its monetary value. To her, these creations would be nothing more than assets to be liquidated. She would sell them to the highest bidder, scattering them to the winds, never once understanding the love and the hours and the heartbeats I poured into each one. She would have destroyed this place without a second thought. And Mark. I love my son, but he is weak. He lets her lead. He would not have been able to protect this legacy. He would have let her break it. So I left them the penthouse. The beautiful, expensive cage. I know it seems like a prize, but it is an illusion, Alara. A gilded trap. It is burdened with mortgages and taxes, a machine that consumes money at an astonishing rate. It requires a certain kind of ruthlessness to maintain, a kind I suspect they do not possess. I left them the symbol of success, because the symbol is all they would ever understand. But this place, this is the substance. This is the true inheritance. This is my life's work. I am leaving it to you, Alara, because you are the only one who will understand. You are the only one who can hear the music. You are not weak. You are quiet. And in your quietness, there is a strength that neither Mark nor Jessica could ever comprehend. You are a keeper. A guardian. I am entrusting my heart to you. Don't sell it. Not unless you must. Learn it. Care for it. Finish the ballerina for me. Her melody is in the schematic on the wall. This is not an ending I have given you, Alara. It is a beginning. Forgive me. Yours, always, Richard. I let the letter fall to my lap. The room was silent, save for the quiet, rhythmic ticking of a single, ornate clock on the wall, a sound I hadn't noticed until now. It was counting the first seconds of my new life. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my heart. But it was no longer the grief of being forgotten. It was the grief of a lifetime of missed understanding, of words left unsaid. He wasn't a cruel man. He was a hidden man. A man who had built a fortress not just of money, but of secrets. And he had just given me the key to the innermost room. I was not the curator of his home. I was the inheritor of his soul. And I, Alara Vance, a woman who had spent her life in the shadows, had just been handed a legacy of astonishing, mechanical light. I don't know how long I sat on that stool, the letter in my lap, listening to the ticking of the clock. Minutes or hours. Time had lost its familiar rhythm. When I finally stood, my legs were stiff. I spent the night in the workshop, not sleeping, but drifting in a strange, wakeful state on a small cot tucked in a corner I hadn't noticed before. I listened to the quiet hums and clicks of the machines at rest, as if they were breathing around me. I was a stranger in the heart of a life I should have known. Morning came, casting long, dusty fingers of light through the grimy windows of the main house. The contrast was jarring. Out there was the decay Richard had used as a costume. In here was the vibrant life he had hidden. I knew then that I couldn't live in the front of the house as it was. It felt like an insult to the pristine sanctuary in the back. I needed to clean it. I needed to claim the whole space, the disguise and the truth, and make it my own. It was a simple, practical thought in a sea of emotional chaos, and I clung to it like a life raft. I needed soap, buckets, sponges, a broom. And looking at the sagging porch step, I thought a hammer and some nails wouldn't go amiss. I walked out into the Harmony Creek morning. The town was a little more alive than it had been the day before. A pickup truck rumbled down the main street. The door to the diner was propped open, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon hung in the air. It still felt like a town from another era, but today I saw it differently. It wasn't a punishment. It was a hiding place. A place so quiet and overlooked, no one from Richard's New York world would ever think to look for him here. Halfway down the street, I found it. Jones's Hardware and Repair. The sign was hand-painted, the letters straight and true. The large front window was crammed with a chaotic, but strangely orderly assortment of tools, engine parts, and coils of wire. It was the only place on the street that looked truly, actively in use. A small bell jingled above the door as I entered. The air inside was thick with the smell of motor oil, sawdust, and old iron. The shop was a labyrinth of tall wooden shelves groaning with boxes of screws, pipes, fan belts, and all the unglamorous nuts and bolts that hold the world together. Behind a long, scarred wooden counter stood a man who seemed to be made of the same materials as his shop. He was tall and lean, probably in his late 70s, with a full head of silver hair and a face etched with the fine lines of a life spent outdoors. His hands, resting on the counter, were large and calloused, the knuckles stained with grease. He looked up as I came in, his blue eyes sharp and appraising under bushy white eyebrows. "Help you?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Yes," I said, my voice sounding small in the cavernous space. "I need some cleaning supplies. And a hammer. And some nails, I suppose." He nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on my face for a moment longer than necessary. "Cleaning." It wasn't a question, but a statement. "You the one moved into the old Miller place at the end of Willow?" "Yes. It needs some work." He grunted in agreement. "Been needing work for 30 years. He turned and began to gather things from the shelves behind him, a sturdy-looking broom, a metal bucket, a bottle of pine-scented cleaner. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy, his hands sure and practiced. He set a solid claw hammer on the counter. "What size nails?" I'm not sure." "For a porch step." He picked out a small cardboard box without hesitation. "These'll do." He tallied the items on a paper pad with a pencil stub. As he wrote, he kept glancing at me. I felt like a puzzle he was trying to solve. "You look familiar," he said, finally putting the pencil down and looking me straight in the eye. "I can't place it, but I know your face." My heart gave a little jump. "I'm new here. I'm from New York." A flicker of something, disbelief, maybe recognition, crossed his face. "New York," he repeated, testing the words. He leaned forward slightly, his sharp eyes studying my features. "Wait a minute. You're Rick's wife." The name was a shock. "Rick. Not Richard." "You knew my husband?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Knew Rick?" "Sure. Good man. Quiet. Kept to himself mostly." He tapped a finger on the counter. "He showed me a picture of you once. Years ago. Said, 'Sam, this is my Alara. Never thought I'd see you in the flesh, especially not in here.'" He shook his head in wonder. "I'm Samuel Jones. Folks call me Sam." The floor seemed to shift beneath my feet. This man, this stranger, was a piece of Richard's secret life. He was real. He had known him. He came here often?" I asked, hungry for any detail. "Like clockwork," Sam said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "Every other month or so, for a week. Sometimes more. Would come in here for parts, a specific gear, a certain grade of brass. Knew more about clockwork than any man I ever met. Magic, what he could do with his hands." The words from the letter echoed in my mind. Magic with gears and springs. He never said what he was doing?" Sam let out a short, gruff laugh. "Rick didn't say much about anything. But I knew. You can't work with your hands your whole life and not recognize another craftsman. He was an artist. Told me he was a consultant. I figured his real business was whatever he was building in that back room of his." He paused, his expression turning serious, more gentle. "He spoke of you, you know. Not often. But when he did, he had a look on his face. Said you had a good eye for how things fit together, even if you didn't know it." Tears pricked my eyes again. A compliment delivered secondhand, years late, from across the divide of death. Sam must have seen the emotion on my face, because his gruff demeanor softened completely. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. He was a good man. One of the few." He pushed the cleaning supplies and the hammer across the counter toward me. "No charge," he said before I could reach for my purse. "Call it a welcome to the neighborhood. From me and from Rick." He looked down at my hands, soft and uncalloused, so different from his own. "If you need a hand with anything over there, that porch or anything inside, you just come and ask." It can be daunting, a place like that. It was more than an offer of help with repairs. It was an offer of alliance. This man, Sam Jones, was the first and only living link to the husband I never knew. He was the keeper of Richard's other story. "Thank you, Sam," I said, and my voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It was gratitude, but it was more. It was the feeling of a castaway spotting a friendly sail on the horizon. I left the shop carrying the bucket, the broom, and the hammer. The tools felt solid and real in my hands. I was no longer just a grieving widow and exile. I was Alara. And I had work to do. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of physical labor I hadn't experienced since I was a young woman. Guided by an unexpected and deeply buried well of resolve, I attacked the front of the house with a fury. I scrubbed the floors until the old linoleum gleamed. I washed the windows, letting bright, honest sunlight flood the rooms for what must have been the first time in decades. I beat the dust from the threadbare rug in the yard, sending up clouds of the past that were carried away on the hot Oklahoma wind. Sam was true to his word. On the third day, he showed up at my door with a toolbox and a few sturdy planks of lumber. He didn't say much, just nodded at the sagging porch and got to work. In a few hours, the rotten boards were gone, replaced by a new, solid step that didn't groan under my weight. He showed me how to patch the hole in the wall where plaster had crumbled, his large, gentle hands guiding my own. We worked in a comfortable silence, punctuated by the simple, satisfying sounds of work, the scrape of a trowel, the sharp report of a hammer. He never asked about the will or about New York. He spoke only of Rick. He'd tell me small stories as we worked. How Rick had helped him fix the intricate clock in the town hall. How Rick had once spent an entire afternoon helping him recalibrate a complex piece of machinery, refusing any payment. He painted a picture of a man who was patient, brilliant, and deeply respected in this small, quiet town, a version of my husband I had never been allowed to see. Every evening, after a day of cleaning and repairing, I would retreat to the workshop. It was my reward. I'd make a simple supper in the now-clean kitchen and bring it to the workbench. I'd sit on that stool and just be. I studied the creations on the shelves, marveling at their complexity. I gently touched the unfinished ballerina, tracing the delicate lines of her wooden limbs. I found the schematics Richard had mentioned, intricate, beautiful drawings pinned to a corkboard, his careful notes in the margins. It was a language I didn't understand, a map of a world I was only just discovering. I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. The shock and humiliation of the will were receding, replaced by a quiet, focused purpose. I was no longer an exile. I was a custodian. This place, both the humble house and the magical workshop, felt more like home than the penthouse ever had. It was on a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks to the day after I'd arrived, that the other world called. I was cleaning one of the glass display cases in the workshop when the shrill, unfamiliar sound of a telephone made me jump. I hadn't even realized there was one. It was a simple, old-fashioned landline mounted on the wall near the cot, its black plastic body a relic from another time. It rang again, a piercing summons from the life I had left behind. My hand hesitated over the receiver. I had no desire to speak to anyone from New York, but I knew who it had to be. Reluctantly, I picked it up. "Hello, Mom? Is that you?" Thank God. It was Mark. His voice was frayed, stretched thin with anxiety. "Yes, Mark. It's me. Mom, I've been trying to reach you for days. Your cell phone just goes to voicemail." I'd turned it off when I left New York and hadn't thought to turn it back on. That life, with its constant pings and demands, felt a million miles away. "I'm here," I said simply. "How are you? Are you okay? Where are you? Is it awful?" The questions tumbled out, one after the other. "I'm managing," I said, my voice even. The ballerina on the workbench seemed to be watching me, her unfinished face serene. "The house is simple, but it's clean now." "Oh, good. That's good." He sounded distracted, his relief performative. I could hear the real reason for his call humming beneath the surface of his words. "Listen, Mom, the reason I'm calling is, we're having a bit of a cash flow situation here." I waited, silent. "It's the penthouse," he said, his voice dropping. "The taxes on the inheritance they're astronomical, Mom. Dad he never set anything aside for it. And the monthly maintenance fees, the property taxes, it's bleeding us dry. Jessica bought some new furniture and, well," he trailed off, the rest of the sentence hanging in the air, "she's spending money we don't have." "I see," I said. My voice was calm, detached. I felt a strange lack of sympathy. It was exactly what Richard had predicted in his letter. The gilded trap was springing shut. So, I was thinking, Mark continued, his voice taking on a wheedling tone I hadn't heard since he was a teenager asking for car keys. Dad must have left you something, right? Besides the house. Some savings, an account I don't know about? We just need a little help, Mom. A loan, just to get us over this hump until some of Dad's investments mature. The request was so predictable, it was almost laughable. The dutiful, weak son, sent by his avaricious wife to solicit funds from the poor, exiled mother. A month ago, I would have emptied my small savings account for him without a second thought. It was what I had always done. I was the fixer, the smoother-over, the soft place to land. But I wasn't that woman anymore. That woman had died in a lawyer's office on the 54th floor. I looked around the workshop at the priceless, secret legacy my husband had entrusted to me. This was my world now, and I would protect it. I'm sorry, Mark, I said, and the coolness in my own voice surprised me. I can't help you. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. What? Mom, it's me. We're in trouble. Richard's will was very specific, I continued, the words coming to me easily, as if Richard himself were whispering them in my ear. He left you the New York assets. He left me this house. There's nothing else. It wasn't a lie. The workshop's value was not in money, but in something far greater. But there has to be something, he sputtered, a note of panic entering his voice. A safe deposit box? Bonds? He wouldn't have just left you with nothing. I have a roof over my head and enough to get by, I said calmly. I'm afraid you'll have to manage the assets your father left you. I could hear Jessica's sharp voice in the background. What is she saying? Did you ask her? Mark's voice became a frantic whisper. Mom, please. Jessica is, you don't understand. No, Mark, I said, and my voice was firm, solid, like the new porch steps Sam had built. I think for the first time, I do understand. And with that, I gently placed the receiver back in its cradle, cutting off his desperate plea. The click of the phone disconnecting was a sound of liberation. It was the first time in my life I had said no to my son. The first time I had chosen my own survival over his comfort. I stood there in the quiet hum of the workshop, my hand still on the phone. I was not weak. Richard was right. I was quiet. And I was learning, with every passing day, the formidable strength that could be found in that quietness. A week after Mark's call, a new, unsettling thought began to take root in my mind. Richard had entrusted me with his life's work, but I didn't truly understand the nature of my inheritance. I knew it was beautiful, I knew it was his soul rendered in wood and brass, but I didn't understand its context in the wider world. Was it the brilliant work of an unknown amateur, or was it something more? To be a proper guardian, I had to know exactly what I was guarding. I brought it up with Sam one afternoon as he was helping me fix a sticking window. Sam, I began hesitantly, Richard's work. The things in the back room. Is it valuable? He stopped what he was doing and looked at me, his blue eyes serious. Ilara, he said slowly, I can fix any engine you put in front of me. I can build a house from the ground up. But what Rick was doing in there, that's a different language. It's valuable to me because I saw the man's heart in it. But in dollars? You need a specialist. Someone who speaks that language. He gave me a name, Alistair Finch, a semi-retired appraiser and horologist in Tulsa, a man known for his expertise in antique automata. He's the best, Sam had said. And more importantly, he's an honest man. It took another week to build up the courage to call. When I finally did, Mr. Finch's voice was dry and precise. He was skeptical, his tone suggesting he was used to hopeful people with dusty junk in their attics. But when I mentioned the name Richard had used here, Richard Miller, and described one of the pieces, the Silver Owl, a flicker of interest entered his voice. He agreed to make the tower drive the following Thursday. The day he was due to arrive, I was a bundle of nerves. Sam came over to be with me, a silent, reassuring presence. We sat in the now spotless front room, waiting. At precisely 10 o'clock, a modest, clean sedan pulled up. The man who got out was small and bird-like, with a neat gray suit and a meticulously trimmed mustache. He carried a leather briefcase and moved with an air of quiet, academic precision. Mrs. Miller, he asked, his eyes taking in the humble house with a polite but unimpressed glance. It's Vance, I corrected him gently. Alara Vance. Please come in, Mr. Finch. I introduced him to Sam. The two men shook hands, a brief, professional acknowledgement. Mr. Finch's gaze swept the simple room. You mentioned some clockwork mechanisms, he said, his tone still professionally distant. Family heirlooms, I presume? Something like that, I said, my heart fluttering. They're in the back. I led him to the plain white door. I watched his face as I opened it, revealing the warm, golden light of the workshop within. Mr. Finch stopped dead in the doorway. His professional composure dissolved like sugar in water. His jaw went slack and his eyes, magnified slightly by his spectacles, widened in pure, unadulterated astonishment. He took a tentative step inside, then another, as if entering a holy place. My word, he whispered, the sound barely audible. He walked slowly toward the shelves, his briefcase forgotten in his hand. He didn't touch anything. He just looked, his head turning from the writing automaton to a music box shaped like a celestial sphere, its tiny planets orbiting a central, golden sun. He finally turned to me, his eyes shining with a feverish light. Who did this work? My late husband. Richard. Richard Vance, he murmured, the name a puzzle he was piecing together. The financier? Good heavens. This is impossible. He set his briefcase down and from it, he produced a pair of soft white cotton gloves and a jeweler's loupe. He approached the silver owl, the piece I had described on the phone, and with the utmost care, began his examination. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft ticking of the one active clock and Mr. Finch's quiet, astonished breaths. For 2 hours, he worked. He moved from piece to piece, his initial shock settling into a deep, scholarly reverence. He would peer at a gear train through his loupe, gently test the action of a lever, or simply stand back and admire the aesthetic perfection of a design. He spoke to himself in a hushed monologue, a stream of technical terms and names of long-dead masters. The escapement is flawless, a fusee chain of this quality. This is on par with jacket draws. The cam and lever system is a work of pure genius. Vaucanson would have wept. Sam and I just watched, silent witnesses. I felt a swell of pride so fierce it almost hurt. This was Richard's true genius, finally being seen, finally being understood. At last, Mr. Finch took off his gloves and turned to me, his face pale with emotion. Mrs. Vance, he said, his voice thick. This is not a collection. A collection is something you buy. This is a life. This is the work of an undiscovered master, a genius on the level of the greatest 18th century craftsman. I have seen pieces like this in museums, the Met, the Louvre, but never a private body of work of this quality, this ingenuity. I held my breath. Mr. Finch, I asked you to come here for evaluation. He gave a short, breathless laugh. Evaluation. It's like asking for a valuation of a sunset. Where does one even begin? He gestured around the room. The writer automaton alone, if it were to go to auction at Christie's, would fetch a price in the high 7 figures. The celestial music box, perhaps more. The silver owl, priceless. He shook his head, running a hand through his neat gray hair. Mrs. Vance, I can only give you a conservative estimate, a number so large it feels absurd to say it out loud. The contents of this room, you are looking at a value well north of $50 million. The number hung in the air, a physical weight. 50 million. My mind went blank. I felt a wave of vertigo and reached out to steady myself on the workbench. Sam put a firm, grounding hand on my shoulder. The penthouse in New York, Mr. Finch continued, unaware of my inner turmoil. The asset your son inherited? Based on public records, it's worth perhaps 4, maybe 5 million. Before you even factor in the debt against it. What your husband left you here, you could buy a dozen of them. The irony was so profound it was almost violent. The weak place. The forgotten scrap of land. The pity in the lawyer's eyes. It was all a lie. A brilliant, magnificent lie. Richard hadn't exiled me. He had crowned me. Then, Mr. Finch's expression sobered. He looked from me to Sam, then back again. Mrs. Vance, I must give you a word of warning, he said, his voice low and serious. Men have killed for a single piece like this. A treasure of this magnitude does not stay secret for long. It sings a song that greedy people can hear from 1,000 miles away. You must be careful. Very, very careful. His words hung in the air, chilling the warm light of the workshop. The joy and shock of the valuation were instantly replaced by a cold nod of fear. I was not just the keeper of a secret. I was the guardian of a dragon's hoard. And Mr. Finch was right. The song was in the air. And I knew, with a sudden, terrible certainty, who would be the first to hear it. The $50 million figure did not settle into my life gracefully. It hovered, an invisible, shimmering ghost in the quiet rooms of my house. Mr. Finch's warning had transformed my sanctuary into a fortress I was wholly unequipped to defend. Every night, the prairie wind whistling around the eaves sounded like whispers. The shadow of the gnarled oak tree in the moonlight became a crouching figure. The workshop was no longer just a place of wonder, it was a vault, and I was its sole, fragile guard. Sam must have sensed my anxiety. He started stopping by every day, sometimes with a bag of groceries, sometimes just to sit on the porch with me and watch the sunset, his silent presence a bulwark against my fears. We didn't speak of the money. We didn't have to. It was the unspoken truth that sat between us. Life settled into a tense, new routine. I spent my days tending to a small vegetable garden I'd started in the backyard, my hands in the rich, red earth a comforting anchor to reality. In the evenings, I'd read Richard's notes in the workshop, slowly beginning to decipher the language of his art. I was beginning to feel a fragile sense of peace, the fear receding to a low, manageable hum. It was a hot, still afternoon about a week after Mr. Finch's visit. I was on my knees in the garden, thinning out my young carrot seedlings when I heard it. A sound so alien to the quiet rhythm of Harmony Creek that it felt like a physical blow, the low, aggressive growl of a high-performance engine. I stood up, wiping my dirt-stained hands on my apron, and looked toward the dirt track of Willow Lane. A sleek, black SUV, the kind that belongs on the streets of Manhattan, was barreling down the road, kicking up a plume of red dust behind it. It didn't slow down until it skidded to a halt in my driveway, its engine cutting out with an angry snort. The vehicle was a black hole in the bright landscape, absorbing the sunlight, radiating menace. My blood ran cold. I knew, with a certainty that left no room for doubt, who was inside. The driver's side door opened, and Jessica emerged. She was dressed for a New York boardroom, not a dusty Oklahoma afternoon, in a severe black pantsuit and shoes with heels so sharp they sank into the soft dirt. Her face, framed by her perfectly styled hair, was a mask of grim determination. The passenger door opened, and Mark got out. He looked haggard, pale, and deeply, profoundly miserable. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Jessica slammed her door and strode toward me, her heels leaving a trail of small, violent punctures in the ground. So she began, her voice dripping with venomous sarcasm as she surveyed the small, clean house. This is the little hideaway. My God, it's even more pathetic than I imagined. I stood my ground by the porch, my heart hammering against my ribs. The old Alara would have stammered, would have been consumed by shame. But the old Alara was gone. I just looked at her, my silence a wall she hadn't expected. "What do you want, Jessica?" I asked, my voice quiet but steady. "What do I want?" She laughed, a short, ugly sound. "I want to know what you're playing at. Mark calls you, begging for help, and you tell him you're managing. You, who've never managed anything more complicated than a dinner party." It didn't sit right. Mark finally looked at me, his expression pleading. "Mom, I told her not to come." "Be quiet, Mark," Jessica snapped without looking at him. Her eyes, cold and calculating, were fixed on me. "I did a little digging, Alara. There's no record of Richard Vance owning this property. It was bought 30 years ago by a Richard Miller. A ghost. A fake name. Now, why would a man like Richard need a fake name and a secret, disgusting little shack in the middle of nowhere? It's because he was hiding something. And you're hiding it now." Her suspicion was a tangible thing, a predator sniffing the air. She took a step closer, invading my space. "So I'm going to see for myself what was so important that he'd leave his own son to drown in debt for it," she hissed. She moved toward the porch steps. I instinctively moved to block her way. "You are not welcome in this house," I said, the words feeling foreign and powerful on my tongue. For a moment, she looked genuinely shocked. Then her face hardened into a mask of pure fury. "Get out of my way, you old fool." She shoved past me. It wasn't a violent push, but it was forceful enough to make me stumble back. My shoulder hit the door frame, the impact jarring me. Mark cried out, "Jessica, don't," but he made no move to stop her. She was inside. She stormed into the small front room, her eyes darting around, her lip curled in disgust. "What a dump. It's a museum of poverty." She scanned the room, and then her eyes landed on it. The plain, white door. The door that led to everything. It was the only feature of the room that didn't look old and worn. It was just a door, but in the context of her suspicion, it was a vault. "What's in there?" she demanded, pointing a blood-red nail at it. "That's none of your business," I said, moving to stand in front of it. But it was too late. The scent of her expensive perfume filled the small space, cloying and invasive. She looked from my defiant face to the door and back again. A slow, terrible smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a predator that has finally cornered its prey. "Oh, I think it is," she said softly. With a sudden, quick movement, she pushed me aside. I was not prepared for her speed or her strength. Before I could react, she had reached the door, her hand closing around the simple brass knob. She turned it, threw the door open, and stepped inside. I saw her freeze on the threshold, just as Mr. Finch had. But where his face had shown reverence, Jessica's showed something else entirely. Her initial shock melted away in a fraction of a second, replaced by a glittering, rapacious avarice. Her eyes widened, sweeping across the shelves, not seeing the art, not seeing the soul, but calculating, assessing, converting every beautiful, intricate creation into a number. She turned to look at me, her face a terrifying mixture of triumph and rage. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling with the force of her discovery. "You conniving, lying old bitch." The silence that followed her words was heavy and suffocating. Mark, who had followed her into the house, stood frozen in the main room's doorway, his face ashen. He stared into the workshop, his expression a chaotic blend of awe and horror, as if seeing his father's ghost. Jessica took a step further into the workshop, her sharp heels clicking on the clean wooden floor. She ran a hand over the smooth, polished surface of a music box, her touch proprietary, almost obscene. "My God," she breathed, her eyes darting from piece to piece. "This is it. This is everything." She spun around to face me, her face alight with a terrifying, ecstatic fury. "The penthouse, the stocks, that was nothing. A diversion. This is the real inheritance. And you tried to steal it from us." "I didn't steal anything," I said, my voice low and steady. I stepped forward, positioning myself between her and Richard's workbench. "This was left to me." "To you," she shrieked, a raw, ugly sound that echoed in the quiet room. "He left this fortune to a woman who can't even balance a checkbook? Don't be ridiculous. This belongs to his son. It belongs to his family." "I am his family," I said. "You were his housekeeper," she spat. "A relic he kept around for sentimental reasons. Mark is his blood. This is Mark's birthright." She looked at her husband, who was still standing, paralyzed, by the door. "Mark, say something. Your mother has been sitting on a multi-million-dollar treasure while we've been on the verge of bankruptcy." Mark flinched. He looked from Jessica's furious face to my calm one, his own a mask of pathetic indecision. "Mom, what is all this?" he stammered. "This," I said, my gaze never leaving Jessica's, "is your father's heart. And he left it in my care." Jessica let out a bark of derisive laughter. "His heart? Alara, this isn't a poem. This is a collection of assets. Extremely valuable assets. And we're going to sell them. All of them." She started moving along the shelves, pointing. "This one, that one, they all go. We'll call Sotheby's. Christie's. We'll have a proper appraisal and an auction. We'll be set for life. For generations." "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it had the force of a physical blow. It stopped her in her tracks. "What did you say?" she asked, turning slowly to face me. I said no. You will not touch a single thing in this room. You don't have a choice, she sneered. We'll get a lawyer. We'll contest the will. We'll prove Richard was mentally incompetent, that you exerted undue influence. We'll drag you through the mud, you old hag. By the time we're done, you won't have a penny to your name. The threat hung in the air, venomous and real. The old Alara would have crumbled. But looking at her now, standing in this sacred space, spouting her poison, I felt no fear. Only a profound, clarifying anger. I met her gaze, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look away. I saw the hollowness behind her rage, the desperate, grasping greed. And I saw my son, trapped in her web, too weak to break free. It was time to cut the threads. Richard knew you would do this, I said, my voice resonating with a certainty that startled even myself. He knew you would see only the money. He knew you would try to tear this place apart. I looked past her, directly at Mark. His eyes were wide, pleading with me to stop, to give in, to make the conflict go away as I always had. But I wouldn't. Not this time. He called the penthouse a golden cage, Mark, I said, my voice softening slightly. He said it was a trap, burdened with debts that would consume anyone who only valued its shine. Mark visibly flinched, as if I had read his mind. Then I turned my full attention back to Jessica. Her triumphant smirk was gone, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. You were right, Jessica, I said, and her head snapped up. That day in the lawyer's office. You were right about one thing. I took a deliberate step toward her, closing the distance between us until I could see the frantic, confused pulse in her throat. Richard did leave me the weak place, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. He left me his weak place. His own heart, which he hid here in this room for 30 years. He hid it from the world. He hid it from the noise. He hid it from people exactly like you. From the pocket of my apron, I pulled out Richard's letter. It was folded and worn from being read so many times. I held it out. Not to her, but to my son. He left this for me, too, I said to him. I think it's time you read it. Jessica's eyes narrowed. Don't you dare, Mark. It's a trick. But Mark, for the first time, ignored her. He stepped forward, his hand trembling as he took the letter from me. He unfolded the heavy paper and began to read. I watched his face. I saw the confusion, then the dawning, horrified comprehension. I saw his eyes scan the words about his own weakness, about Jessica's greed, about the gilded trap of the penthouse. I saw the shame wash over him, a deep, painful blush that colored his neck and cheeks. His whole body seemed to shrink, to collapse under the weight of his father's final, honest words. He looked up from the letter, his eyes swimming with tears. He looked at the incredible, magical workshop. He looked at his furious, demanding wife. And then, he looked at me. He saw not a weak, pathetic old woman, but the person his father had trusted above all others. The spell was broken. Jess, he said, his voice cracking. We have to go. Go, she shrieked. Are you insane? We are not leaving this gold mine. It's not ours, he said, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. He held up the letter. It was never meant to be ours. He wanted her to have it. He chose her. He was an old fool. No, Mark said, and he finally sounded like a man. He knew. He knew us perfectly. He turned and walked out of the workshop without another word. I heard the front door of the house open and close. The sound of the SUV's engine starting was a roar of defeat. Jessica stood alone in the center of the room, her face a twisted mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. She stared at me, her eyes promising a war she now had no soldier to fight. This isn't over, she spat, her voice a low, vicious promise. Then she turned and stormed out, her heels leaving angry little divots in the wooden floor. I heard the SUV door slam, the tires spitting gravel as she tore down the dirt road, leaving a cloud of red dust and bitter silence in her wake. I stood there in the quiet workshop, my hand resting on the unfinished ballerina. My whole body was trembling, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of a battle I never thought I could fight, let alone win. I had faced the dragon. And I was still standing. The weak place had held. The silence that descended after Jessica's departure was profound. It was deeper than the usual quiet of Harmony Creek. It was the silence of a storm that has passed, leaving the air clean and charged with ozone. The cloud of red dust raised by her SUV slowly settled back onto the parched earth outside. Inside the workshop, the only sound was the steady, reassuring tick of Richard's clock. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there, breathing. I felt an exhaustion so deep it settled in my bones, but beneath it, a new foundation was setting. It was the feeling of having been tested by fire and not turning to ash. A few minutes later, I heard the crunch of footsteps on the gravel. Not the angry, hurried steps of a retreat, but something slower, more hesitant. The front door creaked open. "Mom?" It was Mark. He stood in the doorway of the workshop, his shoulders slumped, his face streaked with dust and tears. He looked utterly broken, but in a way that seemed cleansing, like a fever that had finally broken. He had let Jessica go. "She's gone," he said unnecessarily. "She took the car. Said she was going back to New York to get a lawyer." "I know," I said softly. He looked around the workshop, his eyes no longer clouded by greed or confusion, but filled with a deep, sorrowful wonder. "All these years," he whispered. "He was right here. This was the real him, wasn't it?" "Yes," I said. "This was him. And I never knew." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I was so busy trying to be the son I thought he wanted, the successful one, the one who understood his business, that I never stopped to see the man. He tried, sometimes. He'd try to show me how a watch worked, or talk about the grain in a piece of wood. I always got bored. I thought it was just his quirky hobby. He finally met my gaze, his eyes filled with a shame that was painful to see. "I'm so sorry, Mom. For everything. For letting Jessica treat you that way. For not standing up for you. For not being the man Dad knew I wasn't." The bitterness and anger I had held against him for so long simply dissolved. I saw him not as my betrayer, but as another victim of Richard's secrets, a boy who had been trying to win the love of a father he never truly knew. "He loved you, Mark," I said, and I believed it. "He just didn't know how to show it in a way you could understand." He stayed for 2 more days. We didn't talk much about the future. We talked about the past. He asked about Richard, about the man I had known, and I told him the truth, the good and the bad. And in return, he talked about the pressure he had always felt, the long shadow his father had cast. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. For the first time, I wasn't just his mother. I was a person, and he was a man, and we were 2 survivors of the same quiet, seismic event. On the 3rd morning, a taxi Sam had called for him pulled up. He hugged me at the door, a real hug, his arms tight around me. "I don't know what I'm going to do," he said. "The penthouse, it's a mess. But I'll figure it out. Dad's letter, it was a gift in a way. A terrible, painful gift. It woke me up. I watched him go, a man walking out of a wreckage toward an uncertain future. But he was walking on his own 2 feet. Our relationship was not magically healed, but a bridge had been built over the chasm, fragile but real. The months that followed were quiet and transformative. The threat of Jessica's lawyers lingered in the back of my mind, but the letters never came. I suspected that without Mark's support and with the undeniable proof of Richard's letter, her case was nothing but hot air and spite. Life in Harmony Creek took on a gentle, new rhythm. With Sam's patient guidance, I began to learn. He taught me how to clean the delicate mechanisms, how to oil a stubborn gear, how to read the language of the schematics. My hands, once soft and useless, grew deft and confident. The work was slow, painstaking, and the most fulfilling thing I had ever done. One autumn evening, as the prairie sky outside was painted in shades of orange and violet, I put the final piece into the ballerina. I connected the last tiny gear, wound the key, and stepped back. A soft, hesitant melody, clear as a mountain spring, filled the workshop. It was a simple, beautiful tune I'd never heard before. And then, the ballerina moved. She rose onto her wooden toes, her arms lifting in a perfect, graceful arc. She twirled, a slow, elegant pirouette on her tiny stage, a creature of wood and brass and love, brought to life. Tears streamed down my face, tears not of sorrow, but of a profound, quiet joy. I had finished his last piece. I had completed his last thought. I did not sell the collection. I couldn't. It was not an asset, it was a testament. Instead, with the help of Sam and the small, welcoming community of Harmony Creek, I did something else. We cleared out the front of the house, turning the 2 small rooms into a clean, well-lit gallery. We hung Richard's schematics on the walls like the works of art they were. And we opened the doors. We called it the Harmony Creek Musical and Mechanical Museum. It wasn't grand. It was small and quiet and a little bit out of the way. But people started to come. At first, just locals, then people from the next county, and then, after a small article was written in a Tulsa paper, people from all over. They came to marvel at the magic Richard had hidden away. They would stand in the workshop, their faces filled with the same wonder I had felt that first day. The house, once a symbol of neglect, became the heart of the town, a source of pride and quiet wonder. I am no longer Alara Vance, the shadow. I am the curator, the keeper of the melodies. My life is not one of grandeur or wealth, but of purpose. I spend my days among the ticking clocks and the beautiful, silent machines, sharing my husband's secret soul with the world. Sometimes, in the evenings, I sit on the porch Sam rebuilt, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance. The air is warm and smells of dust and dry grass and the faint, sweet scent of motor oil from Sam's shop down the street. I think of the 52 years I spent in a life that wasn't mine, and of the incredible, unexpected gift I was given at its end. Richard didn't leave me an inheritance of money. He left me an inheritance of self. I pick up the small, celestial music box from the table beside me, the one Richard made to look like the solar system. I turn the tiny brass key. As its clear, ethereal melody drifts into the vast, quiet darkness of the Oklahoma night, I smile. It is the sound of my new life. A quiet life. A strong life. My own.